And I want to do one final talk about what is realistic recovery. And where I'm coming from tonight with this is I think for many people when they get into recovery, they, without realizing it, have an expectation that goes like, if I work hard for a while and deal with my stuff, I'm going to reach a point where the sun's going to shine every day and there'll be no mosquitoes and no problems and life will be beautiful for the rest of my life. And that sets up a lot of people to become quite discouraged in recovery when they are doing well and then they hit a rough patch. And they go, well, what's the point of working so hard then if you still got to go through a whole bunch of crap? And so I thought for the final thing tonight, I'd talk to you about realistic recovery as far as ups and downs, what is realistic to expect in that regard. And so I thought I'd give you a bunch of illustrations from everyday life that basically goes, what is life like? And that is pretty similar to what is recovery like. So first illustration that might help you is if you look at just the stages of our development in life from infancy until death. So it parallels in many regards to recovery. So you look at a baby born into the world, it's like an addict coming into recovery or going to detox and saying, I got it, I need help. And it's like this new life is born. And everybody is quite excited about that. And then the infancy hits, and in those first years of a baby's life, they learn 10 times more than they will learn as they get a bit older. It is the highest learning period within a person's life. Same in recovery. The first few years, you are learning lots, you are growing a lot, and it's a time of a lot of optimism and hope. But you don't give a baby or an infant equations in calculus. You keep it simple because that's what they need at that point. And so usually in early recovery, you give people the basics. You say you need these pieces into your life and you don't try to clutter it and overthink it. You just start them with the basics. And then as they come into childhood, they're off to kindergarten, making friends, exploring, and finding frogs to bring home and stray dogs and all kinds of things, and bringing mud in at this time of year, and all of those things because life is exciting. They're expanding their world, their horizons, and it's an exciting part for them. And they're learning about themselves, they're learning about others, they're learning about their world. And that's what happens in recovery. It begins to expand. And you start with, what do I need to do to stay clean and sober? And then you go, how do I be a better dad or a mom? How do I be a better friend? How do I be a better partner? How do I be a better employee? And you keep expanding as you grow and mature in your life. Then the child hits 12, 13, 14, and they decide they want to be independent from mom and dad and chart their own course in life. So they go through a little bit of a rebellion as they figure out who they are and what they believe. And that causes a lot of panic in the home and often conflict. And that happens in recovery too. You get to a point where you start thinking for yourself. And you go, I don't know if I totally buy what that Tim Fletcher says. And I don't know if I totally agree with my sponsor. And you get your back up about some stuff. And I go, good. Keep on thinking. That's what I want you to do. That's scary. That's a little bit nerve-wracking because you might make bad decisions. But that's part of growth, part of development. And you have tons of ideas and opinions and you think you're right on all of them. And you drive people crazy. But that's growing up. And then you reach this place called adulthood. And life begins to take on a maturity, a wisdom. In that child brain and adolescent brain, you are still operating out of the limbic emotional center. That starts changing and you operate more out of your cortex and you think stuff through and you're able to help other people and you get to the place where you can reproduce yourself. And those are important times. And then you hit old age, and your kids want to stick you in a nursing home, but you go, why? I've got more to offer than I ever have in my life. I've lived life. I've gained wisdom. I've gone through hard knocks, and you reach a place where you're able to help the next generation. So that's very much like recovery. So it follows the same similar stages to what any person follows in the whole journey from birth to death. Then there's another thing that some people use to compare to life, and that is the 4 seasons. So spring is childhood, new life, growth, beauty, innocence. All of that is in springtime. Then you hit summer, 20 to 50, the years of productivity, fruitfulness, and then you start enjoying life and having fun, and summer is part of all of that. And then you hit the fall years, and you're heading into your latter years. Stuff slows down, colors change, not just on trees, but on your head. Leaves fall off, not just on trees, but on your head. And all of those things begin to happen, and then winter comes and you die. It all dies. And then the next generation goes through the seasons all over again. Okay, now I want to take that and apply it to recovery. And I'm just going to change the winter one from death to something else, okay? So recovery, there is springtime. It's a time in recovery of new life, beauty. Everything's fresh. Everything has an innocence about it as you learn. And then you come into into the summer years, and if some of you kind of live out your rebellion, but you learn to be productive and to relax and have fun. And the balance of that in recovery is critical, because you need to work hard, but you need to balance that with rest and fun. And so you do that. Then you hit the fall years, and now you're able to start offering stuff to others. You realize that fall time is actually harvest time? It's when in the seasons when the harvest, all the work now pays off. And all the work now is fruitfulness, but then there's less activity. And then I want you to think about winter from this regard. In recovery, it's not like you go through spring, summer, fall, and winter, and that's the end. You can go through spring several times. You can go through summer many times. You can go through fall at different times. But you will go through a winter. And what a winter is a time in your life and in your recovery where it's just like there's a coldness, a darkness, doesn't feel like anything's growing. It doesn't feel like anything's happening. And it can be, for many people, a very discouraging thing. Because if you've lived in your limbic brain where you want everything exciting, winters feel dead and you want to create chaos to liven it up. But winters are part of the normal patterns of a person's life. Hard times. So here's what I want you to understand. Recovery isn't constantly summertime. Recovery is a bit of spring, summer, fall, winter, all mixed up. You're going to like some seasons in your recovery better than others. You're going to want to stay and park and put up your RV in some seasons and skip the others. But what I want you to realize is that all seasons are part of life. They add variety to life. They add fullness to life. And they are necessary for the earth's health. Do you realize if we didn't have winter, we wouldn't have winds that shifted the air around. We wouldn't have ocean currents, which keep the oceans alive. We wouldn't kill some of the very dangerous viruses and bacteria. All of that is necessary to keep our planet somewhat healthy. And the same is true in our life. And I'm going to develop that now because we all can see how spring and summer are wonderful. We love it. Many of us love fall time and that time of harvest and celebration. It's the winter that really gets us. So I want you to think about that. I'm going to switch the illustration now to the weather. Manitobans love to talk about the weather. It's outside of that, mosquitoes and the bombers and jets, we ain't got much to talk about. But stream weather is kind of like our winter. So again, I'm going to give you a bunch of pictures to help you see what the weather stuff is like. But think of winter extreme weather. Take a desert. So to us who don't live in a desert's a nice place to visit. On a holiday for a day or two. But to live there, nothing grows there. It does not support life. It is dry, it is hot, and it is barren. But it is part of our planet. And a parallel to having a winter season in your life is you can say you're going to have a desert season at times. And those are the hardest ones to get through. With that, you're also going to get drought. And drought is, again, like a desert, only it's in an area that has had lots of rain and growth. And then all of a sudden the rain stops and everything dries up. And then usually with that, you get times of extreme heat where the temperature goes up and you are stressed out. Life is like you're in a fire, it's burning. It is a very, very difficult time. So let me stop. Why in the world do we have seasons in our life that are like a desert, that are like drought? I've had two things in my life that have really illustrated that to me. And let me just say this. There wouldn't be a Finding Freedom today if I didn't go through a desert or a winter that lasted about 4 years. I thought at times it would destroy me, but it did something in me that set me up for all that came afterwards. So let me give you two illustrations of what is happening there. I grew up in southern Ontario in what was known as the Tobacco Belt. So around our house were tobacco farms. I had friends that worked in tobacco, owned tobacco farms. All the kids in high school basically picked tobacco at tobacco harvest time. And they would, within a few days, their hands would be black. And then their hands would crack because of the tar and the nicotine and all of that. But one day I was talking to a friend. So if you don't know how tobacco is grown, it grows in sand. And if you don't understand sand, sand does not retain water. So if you pour water on sand, it just goes right through it. So that's what they grow tobacco in, which is very weird. So if you were to go to where I was born and see the tobacco fields, you would see at the beginning of the season, they're irrigating constantly, and these tobacco plants start to grow. And then in the peak of the summer, at the hottest time, they stop irrigating, and there's no rain, and it just is dry. And I asked my friend, why do you stop irrigating? And here's what he said. He said, in order for tobacco to be quality tobacco, it needs the nicotine and the tar. And so when we stop irrigating, the tobacco plant panics and it drives its roots down into the ground even further, looking for water, and it finds tar and nicotine as well. So the dryness creates a state that pushes you to dig your roots down deeper. And I go, isn't that a beautiful illustration? Because in life, we need a strong foundation. And if we just have an easy life, we don't really feel the need for that. But when life gets hard, like a winter or a desert, it forces us to drive our roots down deep or we'll die. And that can be a life-giving thing for us, so that drought, that winter, was actually a blessing because it forced you to go to a place where life was available that wasn't on the surface. When I came through that 4-year dark period for myself, I worked on a farm that was a tree farm and a horse farm. And one of the things that they did with spruce trees when they're growing is when they're about that size, about a year or so old, they take this big U blade, okay? And they take a tractor, and that U blade goes underneath all the spruce trees. And I said to the fellow I worked with, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm cutting all of their roots off." I go, "Why?" He says, "Because right now they got one root and a couple ones sticking out. When I cut their roots off, they're going to create all kinds of roots, and they're going to drive them down deep. And that will enable them to develop a strong, tall tree that can withstand storms." So again, it's to realize that those hard, dry, desert places often are blessings if we respond by driving down to a deeper place that gives life, stability, security, and we can withstand storms we never would have been able to otherwise. Let me take you to the next extreme weather, and that is the hurricane season, the severe storms. Kim's parents have a condo in Florida right on the ocean, and so they've seen some of the hurricanes that have come through, and they are just brutal. And you go, what in the world is the purpose out of hurricanes? So I want you to stop and just think about the desert and the drought and all of that. Start to get this thought in your mind. Out of something that on one hand is very destructive, it also creates something very beautiful. So with the hurricanes, if you left trees without ever having storms with strong winds, what would happen is dead branches would just stay in the tree. And they would block the sunlight, and they would stop new growth and stronger branches from growing. So what happens when you get a strong storm or a hurricane? It actually prunes the tree of all the dead branches so that the tree becomes stronger and healthier. So again, what looked like it was destructive actually was beneficial. What they have also realized is that hurricanes play a tremendous help in all of the global warming stuff and in oxygenating the oceans and keeping the oceans healthy. Storms play a critical role in all of that. Next one, Lorraine, I can't remember. Okay, earthquakes. Again, times in your life that feel like an earthquake where there's just this upheaval. Everything seems to get turned upside down. It is so difficult, so confusing. We can't see any good that comes out of it. But again, what they're finding is as those tectonic plates rub against each other to create those earthquakes, there are benefits to our planet that are coming out of that, and they're beginning to understand. So once again, something very destructive is bringing about a very good result. Wildfires. You'll get those in your life where everything seems to start going up in smoke. Everything you care about is on fire. You're losing it. And you go, what is the purpose of that type of destruction? And again, what they're finding with wildfires, that if forests don't have wildfires, they begin to die. Wildfires prune the forests of all the dead stuff. They create cause pine cones to release their seeds, and they bring about new growth, new trees. None of that would happen without a fire. So again, there's a benefit to it. And then the good old volcano, where everything explodes and blows up. Kim and I were in Hawaii last year, and we got to go to Volcano National Park. It was fascinating. But again, they have found that because of volcanoes, so much good comes out of that. If you were to go into Southeast Asia to all the volcanic Pacific Rim, the islands that are there that don't have volcanoes, that are part of a rainforest, it rains all the time. they don't grow anything. But the islands that have a volcano that's erupting and it's still a rainforest, they are fertile. And they are just lush, green farmland and jungles because of all of the fertilizer coming out of those volcanoes. So something that seemed so destructive was such a blessing. And that's what you're going to find in life. I'm old enough now to look back and see when I responded, they didn't feel like it at the time. They made me mad, but they me that I never would have had. I want to give you one other way. Now I want to give you one last illustration. Beautiful, beautiful. And if you've ever stood on a mountain peak and looked out, the view is just amazing. And we talk about mountaintop experiences that are exhilarating, that we're just so pumped, it's so exciting. But there's other parts of mountains that I want you to think about. Some of you find yourself on a mountain, but you're not on the top right now. You're having to walk up the side. Every day is walking uphill. Every day feels like work. Second thing that I want you to realize is we would like sometimes to stay on a mountain because there's not a lot of bugs on the top of a mountain. It's very pretty. But you realize that nothing grows on top of high mountains. And so growth doesn't usually happen there, and it happens in valleys. But I want you to think of one other thing. Mountains were created through the greatest cataclysmic events, the most horrific events, as two plates pushed against each other and forced up these mountains. Mountains were born out of the greatest disasters of the world. And yet they become the most beautiful things that we love to see. Then there's the valleys. Valleys are the dark times, the low times, the winters, the deserts, all of that, the hard times. But I want you to think of them in terms of a valley. And it's this. When everything's dry, all water flows downhill. And so if you want to find water, you go to the lowest place. And there you get a drink for your thirsty soul. And so what we find sometimes in life is the dark times, when we stay in that and we accept it, it actually becomes something that quenches the thirst of our soul. We find there a drink of water we wouldn't get anywhere else. And then I had to throw it in. There's good old Manitoba. And I put boring. Here's what I want you to understand. Do you realize that a lot of recovery and most of life is a flat plain? You get the odd mountain, you get the odd valley, you get the odd desert, you get the odd storm, but most of the time we're in a valley or we're in a flat plain. We're just going along day by day by day. And that's just as important as anything else, because where does the most of the food grow in the world? On flat plains. And so you and I are going into this journey called recovery, and we would all like it to be sunny days and mountaintop experiences. But no, that wouldn't be best for us. We would never grow if we were just in the sun and on a mountain. We only grow when you get the variety of all the different geographical things, the storm weather things, and we have to accept that much of life is day by day walking on a very flat plain. And the sooner we can accept all of those things, the more we're not going to complain about the hand that life has dealt us. And we're able to say, what can I learn from this season in my life? What can I learn from this valley or this winter period or this desert or drought? Is it driving me to a deeper place, to drive roots down, to build strength into me? I want to be teachable. I want to learn the lessons that these seasons and events have for me. I hope that just gives you perspective, but hopefully some encouragement and reality as well. So again, I wanted to make the Christian part connect to the first part. And this past summer, Kim and I went to Germany to see our youngest daughter, and then with her we went to Egypt. And so while I was in Egypt, we were right on the Red Sea, right on the desert. I just started thinking about deserts and the purpose of deserts, the benefits of desert and all of that. And I thought I'd share some of that tonight, because in Deuteronomy 8, it says that God took Israel out of Egypt and put them in a desert. And what you need to understand from that is that where they were staying in Egypt was the best farmland in the whole world. It was the lushest, best irrigated, richest soil of anywhere in the world. And so God took them out of that very fruitful, lush place and stuck them out in a desert. And the question would be, why? What's the point of that? Why not keep them in a place where they can be productive? So that's what I want to explore with you. But before I read it, let me just give you this as a backdrop. 100 years or so ago, a fellow wrote a book called The Dark Night of the Soul. And the point of that book was that you go at times in your soul into a dark night. And you get stuck in this dark night. And you wonder, God, where's the light? Why is there no dark night? And so that ties into what we were talking about in the first half with the desert and the winter. When I was going through my time, I reached a point where I started writing down a lot of the stuff that was going on inside of me, and I called it the winter of the soul. And it was just my own personal reflections on that. So I just want to continue that. So here's what it says in Deuteronomy 8. Remember how the Lord your God led you through the wilderness for these 40 years, humbling you, testing you, to prove your character and to find out whether or not you will obey his commands. Now it keeps going with a few other things, but that I want to use as a backdrop to what is the purpose for God taking us at time into a desert. And I don't want tonight to be kind of a downer night and a super depressing night and whoopee, I got deserts to look forward to. But what I want you to be able to realize is that they will come, and that they are not the end of the world, that they do serve a purpose that can be a very beneficial purpose. So the first thing is this. The desert for Israel was a safe place. It was a refuge. They had been stuck in this very abusive land where they were slaves, and they were involved in a culture where there was all kinds of negative messages coming at them. They were deeply wounded. They needed to get away to a place that was like a hospital where they could heal, where they could find safety. And many people in early recovery need that. They need to get out of their unsafe environments, out of their toxic relationships, and spend time in what feels like a protective bubble. If you look at being in a desert, you're cut off from everybody. You aren't able to be influenced by other cultures and other people. You're all alone. And you're in a refuge, if that's how you would want to see it. It's interesting to me that some of the greatest leaders in the Bible, Moses and David, next to Jesus, they are considered the two greatest leaders. Both of them went into a desert because they were wanted men. People were wanting to kill them. The desert was their refuge, their safe place, and it became their place of healing. But then it goes a wee bit further. A desert is a place to grow. It's kind of like a greenhouse or an incubator. So if you think of what Israel had come from, all of the dysfunction of being involved in an unsafe environment, in a culture that abused them and beat them down, they needed to be yanked out of that culture and put in an incubator, in a greenhouse, so that they could learn new ways of living, so they could learn new coping skills, so they could relearn how to live life in a healthy way. And sometimes that's what we need when we've been surrounded by dysfunction and unhealthiness. We need a place to go where we can relearn how to live. We can put down the old tools that aren't healthy and learn new tools that are healthy. And sometimes it takes a desert to provide that kind of environment to grow in. Then the next one, he said that he put them there to test them, that see if they would obey him. God wants us to be all in. God wants us to be 100% committed. And many of us would think that we're all in, that we're 100% committed, but we don't even know there's parts of our heart that are actually quite committed to a comfortable lifestyle. And so if we were given an option, will you obey God and follow him into this path, even though you'll have to give up a whole bunch of your comforts? Or will you stay in your comfortable lifestyle? All of a sudden, we wouldn't be so sure if we're all in. And so what we find is that we have idols in our heart, or things that we've fallen in love with that we're not even aware that they might be greater than our love to God. And it's in a desert that gets exposed. And God says, I'm putting you in a hard place to see if you'll still obey me even in this place. Or are you only going to follow me when it's easy? Are you only going to follow me when it gives you instant gratification? When it gives you instant positive results? Or are you still going to follow me when life is really hard and you're not feeling you're getting a whole lot of positive out of that? And so it does something inside of us that begins to expose the things that aren't healthy, the things we love that maybe we love too much, and it begins to show us the things that need some work and that need to grow. When I was a young dad, I thought I should be a poster child for being a loving man. And then all of a sudden, I got sick and I was tired all the time. It was easy to love my kids when I felt like loving my kids, when I had energy to love my kids. But when you're sick, you don't feel like loving your kids. And all of a sudden it was, are you still going to love your kids even though you don't feel like it? Are you still going to love even when you're in a hard place? Or is love only work for you when it's easy for you? And that does something inside of us that begins to expose, I thought I was loving, but when you get away from the easy life, there's a selfishness that kicks in that needs to get changed. And so deserts are things that put us in places that show what's going on. I tell clients all the time, clients come to React and they say, oh, I know so much now about complex trauma and about living healthy, and I've got all these tools, and I think I'm ready, and I think I've learned all the lessons. And I go, this is the classroom, the exam is out there. It's easy to think you've learned it all in a classroom, but it's out there when the exam takes place that you go, oops, I think I better relearn that. Or I didn't learn that as well as I thought. And that is what the deserts do. They put us in places where we say, am I going to keep doing the right thing even when it's difficult? Because if I only do the right thing when it's easy, then I'm never going to make it in life or in recovery. There's another piece that comes out of this desert experience, and that is, go to the next one, Lorraine, sorry. It takes us to the end of our own resources. It takes us to the end of depending on ourselves. Because in a desert, you're forced to depend on God in a way you've never done before. You see, when I was healthy and strong, I didn't need God to help me love my kids because I had all the energy I needed, all the desire I needed. But when I was sick, it's like, God, if you don't help me out, I'm in trouble here. I don't naturally have the resources right now to love my kids. I need you to help me in a way I've never needed you before. Now that at times feels cruel, but do you realize that we are the happiest when we are most dependent on God? We think we're happy when we're self-sufficient and we don't need anybody and we got all kinds of energy and we can do whatever we want, but that leads to emptiness. But when we are forced to depend on God and then we do depend on God, it leads to a more satisfying life than any self-reliance will ever deliver. But what I have found in my own life, and you know in your life, we don't naturally want to trust God. We just want to trust ourselves. And so God, how does he teach us to trust him and teach us the value of trusting him? He sticks us in a desert. And do you know what we do in the beginning of the desert? We complain against God. We get mad at God. We say, this isn't fair. We thought you were a loving God. How come you're not making this go away? And he says, shut up and start trusting. And we get to the end of ourself, to such a desperate place. We cry out like never before. We depend like never before. And that usually means we surrender like never before. And that leads to growth and a depth of life and satisfaction greater than anything that we've ever experienced before. But then more than that, we get to know God better in a desert. Do you realize that in many homes, they're very superficial, they don't talk much, and as long as everything's going well, they don't feel the need to talk to each other except on superficial levels, having fun. But then a hard time hits. Now, two things happen in families when hard time hits. Number one, some families fall apart. And so many dysfunctional families, a hard time exposes all their dysfunction and they just fall apart. But healthier families, hard times hit and they lean on each other. It drives them to talk at deeper levels, to get to know each other better, to trust each other more. It brings about a greater family. And so what happens in our relationship with God, as long as it's going smoothly, we don't think we need to know God well. As long as we know him a bit, that's pretty good. But God says, no, the more you get to know me, the more happy you'll be, the more you'll trust me, and the more it will complete your life. But we don't naturally just say, okay, God, teach me. We got to go to a desert where we're forced to get to know God. So guess what God did with Israel? And this is just a heads up for people coming out of complex trauma like Israel was. They did not naturally trust God. The only way they learned to trust God was through kicking and screaming. He forced them into situations where they complained and yelled, but they were left no option but trust him. So he does number one. He says, I am a faithful God. When I make a promise to you, I'll never break it. And they go, sure, God. But then he says, okay, I'm putting you in a desert where there's no food. You go plant all your crops. Nothing's going to grow. But I promised I'm going to feed you. So all of a sudden you go to your fridge and it's bare. And you go, God, you promised. And he says, wait. And he brought manna. Had to do that every day. Because if he had said, I'll give you a week's supply, they would trust him on the Sunday when they got the manna. And then they say, okay, we don't need you for the rest of the week. And he says, no, you're going to need manna every morning. So you're forced to trust me every morning. And we need that, though we don't like it. And so God puts us into situations that are beyond us to force us to trust him. And then he put a cloud in the sky and he says, I'll guide you. And they needed that. And that was all that they understood in the desert. Because in a desert, if they didn't have that cloud in the sky, they didn't have GPS back then. They would have been lost in a desert. Desert's the easiest place in the world to get lost. And so God says, I'm going to put that there until you become convinced that I'm a faithful guide, a faithful provider, that I'm a faithful God. And it's in a desert that you learn that stuff. And we resist that. We don't want it, but that is what God does. Then there's another thing that God does, and now it's about us. And I'm going to go back to that family creation thing. You're forced either. And that is, so when they would come, they didn't trust anybody. When they came out of Egypt, they didn't trust anybody. And God is saying, you can't be a healthy community unless you learn to trust each other. And you can't be a fulfilled community unless you become a family. But when you don't trust each other, you go, yeah, I'm not doing that. People, how? And then they need hate initially. And in our mind, deserts initially make life worse. But if we cooperate with God, deserts always lead to a better life. And that's what they were needing to see. But then beyond that, God said, I want you to reach the world and help them know about me and how to have a relationship with me. I'll take that on. Go ahead and say, okay, no, you got to work together, and you learn how to work with each other and how you need each other and how your strengths benefit me and my strengths benefit you. And you become a community that is a team that puts God on display to the world, and that happens in a desert. And then the next one. Parts to it. I got thinking of every great leader in the Bible, which is also in history. So Moses, David, John the Baptist, Jesus, and Paul. Do you realize before each one started their ministry, they first spent several years in the desert? That was where God trained them. The course to prepare them for ministry. So Moses spent 40 years taking care of sheep. David spent 10 years running from cave to cave, hiding and helping this group of people who were looking to him for protection. John the Baptist, Jesus spent 40 days. Paul spent 3 to 4 years, the greatest leader in history. Every time God was about to introduce a whole new chapter in life. So, Moses brought about the nation of Israel in Israel. Before that happened, he spent time in a desert. David brought about the kingship and made Israel great and all of the monarchy great. Needed a desert. Paul introduced a new thing. Jesus. So what I want you to see is this. When God sticks a person in a desert for a long time, he's about to start a new chapter. He's about to do something special. But he can't get that person ready to start a new chapter until they've been in. And there's something about a desert that changes you. I hope you see that. If you cooperate, and it creates in you a character, a faith that goes deep. There's something in you in a desert that humbles you, and it brings you to a point where you need God, and you realize if anything good comes out of whatever I do, God gets the credit for that. That creates when God is about to write a new chapter. Is for many people, childhood, I think God can say, let's take that as your desert. And let's start there. And you're still going to be dealing with that. But as you deal with that and the pain of that, and you work through that stuff, it's going to drive you to a place of needing God. It's going to drive you to trust. It's going to drive you to need people. It's going to create community. But if you cooperate with that, we can start a new chapter. And that new chapter might be even greater than you ever imagined. I don't think when Moses was in the desert, he had any idea God was going to use him to change the world. I don't think David, when he was in the desert, had any idea God was going to use him to change the world. He just started doing what he felt he should do with no idea of all the benefits that would come out of those desert years. And that is my hope for every single person here.